This webinar is made possible by the Sentio Marriage and Family Therapy Program. Visit us at www.sentio.org.
Hello and welcome. I am very excited to introduce another Sentio webinar on the Essentials of Psychotherapy book series published by the American Psychological Association. My name is Jason Brand, and I'm a senior deliberate practice instructor at Sentio. And today we are back again with our wonderful guest expert, Hannah Levinson. Hello, Hannah, and welcome.
Thank you, Jason.
So a bit about Hannah here. Let's see. Hannah is a professor at the Wright Institute in Berkeley, California. She has specialized in brief dynamic psychotherapy for over 40 years. She has offered 85 professional papers, 11 books, including 3 that are in this deliberate practice book series. And she has released 11 videos with APA illustrating her approach. She's taught over 2,000 grad students and supervised several hundred of them. So needless to say, we are in very, very good hands with our guest expert today, Hannah Levinson. Hannah, welcome again. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm really excited about today.
Great. And we'll be leaving about 10 minutes at the end for questions, which is kind of a new thing we're doing, which last time I thought worked really well. So, but we're gonna be getting into some actual deliberate practice of psychodynamic psychotherapy in just a minute. Let me just say a few things about Sentio. Sentio, a lot going on at Sentio, and I'm just going to run through this real quick. I'm actually going to put in the chat in just a minute. I'll put some links so you can check all this out on your own. Sentio has an MFT program that's just getting started. They have a Sentio Counseling Center, and they have a wonderful supervision residency program, a year-long training in deliberate practice, which I'm a part of and I highly recommend. And exciting enough, we're going to have a chance to meet in person, and Hannah's going to tell us a little bit about that experience. So go ahead, Hannah.
Well, this is the Deliberate Practice Summit. It's going to be in October, end of October, in Los Angeles. And it's going to be a marvelous 2 days. There will be trainers there and therapists there, supervisors, researchers, all really interested in deliberate practice, doing deliberate practice, and desiring to know more about deliberate practice. I've been invited by Tony Ruminaire and Alex Vash to do some deliberate practice exercises regarding accelerated dynamic psychotherapy and emotionally focused couples therapy, as well as psychodynamic psychotherapy, which is the topic for today. So I'll be excited to be with them. Any opportunity I find to work with these 2 guys is marvelous.
Great, and I put a link to
there.
And so yes, it's going to be wonderful, and just to have a whole day with you, Hannah, as the guest expert is going to be wonderful. And I put a link to everything in the chat that you can find. And let's get into it here. A bit of conceptual learning before we get to the procedural learning. And if you've been here before, you probably heard this spiel, but in deliberate practice, we like to make the distinction between conceptual learning and knowledge and procedural learning and knowledge. Conceptual is the kind of learning, knowledge that you do through reflection. So writing papers, talking to peers, reading books, even going to your supervision is conceptual learning very often, unless it's more procedural based. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So all of conceptual learning is important for becoming an expert. But we see in, what we see and why we think deliberate practice is important is because it emphasizes procedural learning, which is learning by doing. So as you can see, we got the piano picture there, and we like to think that, that there's a big part of psychotherapy, which is performative, and especially can be stressful because you're actually sitting in front of clients or patients, and you are performing in front of them. So what we try to do in these webinars and what deliberate practice is doing is creating an environment in which it's as close to possible as the actual sitting down with the client or patient. And so we're going to play around with a little bit of that today. So, and again, nothing wrong with conceptual learning. We just think there's kind of an imbalance, and we're balancing those two things out. Okay, Psychodynamic Psychotherapy is the book we're talking about today. It is one of, I think, 19 books in the series that has been published. And I put a link to it in the chat. You get a 25% discount through the APA and free shipping. So you can get to it there. Tony Ruminaire and Alexander Voss, who run Sentio, they've put together this series. And this one in particular was written by Hannah herself and her co-authors, Jeff Binder and Volney Gay. So go out and buy the book. And Hannah, this is a really thoughtful book. I really appreciate the way that you made this much more than a manual. And what I really like about it is that you've managed to take all of these skills, and you can see there's 12 skills that are covered in the book, and you captured something that I think is just is wonderful, which is a sense of what it feels like to be listened to with a psychodynamic or psychoanalytic ear. And I think that that's such an amazing thing to have accomplished in a very kind of, you know, in a form that's that's like a manual. So it's very cool how you made it creative and dynamic. And my question for you is, how'd you do that? How'd you pack all this into this book?
I'm not going to say it was an easy process.
Okay.
It was challenging. It was very exciting to do, but very challenging. And Jeff and Volney and I would get together every other Sunday on Zoom. This was during lockdown. And we would go over what are the essential psychodynamic skills, which is very hard. You know, the other manuals on other forms of doing therapy, I think, had it a bit easier. But, you know, psychodynamic therapy has been around a while. There are so many different theories within psychodynamic. But what we did is we combed the literature. We looked at the research. We did a survey. We looked at competency skills, and we came up with these 12 because they seem to be repeated over and over again in the literature. And supervisors told us that quite often students have difficulty learning how to do these in the actual therapy. They could write a beautiful paper on it. They understand the concept involved, but procedurally they had difficulty implementing it. So this is how we came up with our 12.
Wonderful. And today we are going to pick out one of the examples here. And Hannah, just, you know, just to everyone out there, Hannah has been generous enough to, we already got July and August webinars set up, and we're going to be getting into, you know, sort of going through a bunch of these skills. So please, you know, keep joining us. And today we are almost smack dab in the middle here, pointing out defenses and inquiring about underlying fear is where we're going to focus. And Hannah, what can you tell us about defenses?
Yeah, well, it's so incorporated into our everyday language, right? People understand defense is a strategy designed to protect. And so Freud coined the term, you know, defense mechanism, and he really saw it as a strategy that was designed to ameliorate or lessen the anxiety that would be coming up when the person unconsciously felt like impulses, sex and aggression were going to come to the fore. Now, in modern contemporary psychodynamic theory, we don't hold to the impulse idea, but we do still think that the idea of defense is extremely important. We see them as self-protective acts, you know, that the child implicitly learned early on that there were certain thoughts, feelings, wishes, behaviors that were unwanted by caregivers, even punished by caregivers. And so they implicitly learned not to do those behaviors, have those feelings, and so forth. Now, of course, that quite diminished the repertoire of the child. And unfortunately, that kind of became how they did their life. Very egocentric, and felt very comfortable. And in fact, it was a way they could stay psychologically safe. And all of this, as I say, without awareness. And unfortunately, because it became so habitual, it continues into adulthood. And then we see many people in our practice who are still behaving kind of anachronistically, as though they were still back there where they had to avoid these thoughts, feelings, wishes, and behaviors. So
beautiful.
Defense
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love the way you say all that, and it makes it very approachable. And how does all this translate to the exercise we're going to be doing today?
Right, right. So I really like this exercise. It's very crisp, and we went right for what would be effective for a trainee to do in working with someone and begin to look at defenses. So the first thing, since these defenses, as I say, are implicitly learned and egocentric, the first thing would be to point out the defense. Help the patient realize, oh, you are using a defense here. Now, we don't just say, oh, there's a defense. So we find ways of validating what they're doing. After all, these are self-protective acts, right? So that's the first, point out, make the person aware, right? Begin to kind of create some distance between themselves in that process. And then secondly, by inquiring about the underlying fear, we're beginning to help the person see the function of the defense, right? What purpose does it serve? And then at what cost?
Wonderful.
What would be underneath the defense?
Yeah, and crisp. I mean, and that's a lot to do. And what is really cool about this is that it is a crisp. It's a crisp strategy for pointing out the defense and wondering about the underlying fear. Wonderful. So just a note on how this is going to work today. The Deliberate Practice Psychodynamic Therapy book, broken down into 12 exercises. It's really written for two people to practice, trainees. We might, people, grad school, or people who are learning psychodynamic psychotherapy, and somebody observing. And so it's really written with that in mind. With a supervisor and two trainees or two interns. But for today, that would be way too cumbersome. So what we're going to do is we are actually going to walk through these exercises, through the exercise, and give you some examples. And you're going to have a chance to put into the chat your responses. And then we're going to get feedback from Hannah as the supervisor. So we're kind of recreating this, and we found that it's a really fun way to do it, and really gives a sense of the kind of practice in kind of real-time, state-dependent practice that we're looking for with deliberate practice. So without any further ado, let's get into what all this looks like, okay? Is that all that clear, Hannah, on how the exercise works?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Let's see. Okay, so just to recap, we have the exercise, pointing out defenses and inquiring about the underlying fear. There's two criteria. One, point out the defensive strategy to the patient in an empathetic and validating manner. And two, inquire or wonder out loud what the patient fears might happen if they did not use the defensive strategy. Okay, so I think that's all clear. And just to make it a little more clear, we got an example here. So the patient is sitting in a therapy session and says calmly, I drive 2 hours to see my significant other every weekend. They never drive to see me, but I don't mind because I'm actually enjoying driving. And the therapist, using the exercise, would respond, it's a good thing you enjoy driving so much. I wonder what you might fear what you might fear might happen if you didn't feel like driving. I wonder what you fear might happen if you didn't feel like driving. So again, pointing out the defensive strategy in a validating way and inquiring out loud what the patient might fear happen if they did not use that strategy.
And
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Hannah, please.
That this is only one of many therapist ways of meeting the criteria, right? Just an example. As we'll see when we get into your examples, there'll be quite a variety, but all of them should have met criterion 1 and criterion 2. So just
wonderful. Yeah, great. So let's get into it. So here is our first example. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read the patient statement. You can see the therapist part is blank. You're going to fill it in the chat, and then we're going to go over them. So patient comes in and says cheerfully, I don't want to be a clingy partner. So whenever I'm with my significant other, I put on a smiley face. Okay. So I'll give you some time to put in some ideas there in the chat.
So while they're doing that, Jason, help me out because I am not seeing the chat. I see the two of us. Oh, now I'm seeing the chat.
Okay.
I'll put it over here. Thank you.
We're getting some good ones here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all for your contributions. It's so cool to see. Oh, they're just pouring in. Wonderful. Thank you. I got one right here. I want to read, Hannah. You ready?
Which one is it?
Julie's. I'll read it, and can I go ahead?
Yeah, please.
Okay. It sounds like you might be feeling something other than smiley. What are you afraid will happen if your partner saw the not smiley part of you?
All right. So as the supervisor here, what I'd be looking at are the criteria. And I'd say that you really nailed the second criterion. Well, why do you feel like you, I'm sorry, I'm losing it here. It's moving?
So it's if your partner saw the not smiley part of you.
There we go. I got it now. Yeah. So if the partner saw the not smiley, that really wonders aloud about the fear. Now, in terms of the first criterion, point out the defensive strategy. It sounds like you might be feeling something other than smiley. That actually might be more like an interpretation. I'm wondering if you can just point out the defensive strategy as you see it in as best an empathic manner as you can. Maybe we can give another one to do a contrast.
Okay. You're really aware of how you come across. I wonder what happens when you come across in a way you didn't intend. What is that like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice, nice. So you could see that it meets both of those criteria. The pointing out the defensive strategy, using a unique way of doing it, and then also getting to the underlying fear.
Right. And can you just contrast a little bit? What's the difference between that and intervention?
You mean what I commented on before?
Yeah.
That you want to stay with pointing out the defensive strategy without making an interpretation. If anything, you'd want to weight it to be something more positive, that you understand they've been doing this their whole life. It makes sense. Sounds like you're good at it. This is important to you, right? Rather than saying, oh, I think there's something else going on here.
I see. Okay, great. Let's get another one here. Sounds like you try to be positive so not to be clingy, but I wonder what would happen within you when you do that on a day when you felt distress.
Yeah, I'd like to see where that is. So, because I work better by, I got it here.
Okay.
So try to be positive, so not to be clingy. Yeah. So you're sneaking in a little bit of the interpretation, which could work. But I wonder what would happen within you when you do that on a day when you felt distress. What might happen? Yeah, I think you're taking a slightly different position on it, but you're also asking what would happen? It's a way of getting at an underlying fear. What would happen on a day when you felt distress? In other words, when you couldn't be so smiley. So I think this is, a uniquely worded, but very apt intervention that meets both of the criteria.
Yeah, what I like about it is that it focuses the client on distress. So it kind of narrows the field a little bit of what the client might focus on, which is always being happy, and then there's sort of contrast to that. It's nice.
Right.
Let's see if you scroll up and you don't want to be needy to your partner. So you put on a smiley face to not be a burden. I wonder what you fear about your needs being too much.
I like that. Again, uniquely stated, but meets both criteria.
Okay, great. I think let's move on to the next, shall we?
Excellent.
Okay. Great. Oh, for that. So here's the example from the book. It seems you put on a smiley face a lot when you are with him. Is there something you fear would happen if he saw you unhappy? Great. So you can really see how kind of people organized very closely to what you had there. Wonderful. Okay, moving along to the next example here. Patient comes in embarrassed and says, "At first I felt guilty about breaking our date by text. Then I thought that it's really a kinder way to do it than face to face." That's a great one. "At first I felt guilty about breaking our date by text. Then I thought that it's really kind of a kinder way to do it than to do it face to face." Let's jump in here, Hannah. There's one. Short and to the point. We get to it. Oh, they're coming in so fast.
Yeah. Wait a
Okay.
Whenever you're ready, Jason.
Okay. So short and to the point. A breakup by text. Curious how you think it's kinder. I love that.
Right. Yeah. So a breakup by text. So great. That meets the, what is the defensive strategy? I'm not sure how empathic and validating it's coming across, but it's certainly pointing it out. Right.
Okay.
And the part about the guilt, it would be great if that could get in there in some way, right? Because that might be emotion that one could use. And then the second provocative statement, what was that, Jason, if you repeat it?
Oh, let's see. A breakup by text. Curious how you think it's kinder.
Right, right. So if you're wondering, but you're curious about how that seems kinder to the person, I think indirectly you could get to the defensive strategy. Indirectly you could see what's underneath, but it's elegant and provocative at the same time.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I want to highlight here is that you can see as these are coming in, and what we did on the last example is that people are able to state this in a way, of course, I'm sure most of you are experienced therapists, and you are now stating this in a way that is idiosyncratic to you, that feels comfortable to you, that you know where to go from there, right? And that this is one of the things that often isn't mentioned about deliberate practice, is that it's not just rotely going through and doing these things, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but rather in the process of doing them over and over again, the trainee finds their voice. Now they get to introduce words, concepts, intonation that resonates for them. And I think we're seeing that here with the experienced therapist.
Completely, completely. And it's been one of the great surprises to me about deliberate practice. I think a lot of people, when they hear about it, it sounds like it's this mechanical kind of robotic way of learning to be a therapist. But it's been very far from that in my experience. And I think the examples here today really illustrate that. Here's one that I like, which says, you cared about their feelings and wanted to tell them in a gentle way. Can you tell me what you imagine might have happened if you had said it in person?
Yeah, lovely, lovely. You can hear the empathy and the validating aspect to pointing out the defense, and then certainly inquiring about the underlying issues. Great.
Let's go one more. A short one here. You are trying to find a way to let others down gently. What might be a risk for you doing it face to face?
Lovely also. Right.
Yeah. The only thing what I like about the empathic part at the beginning is that it really personalizes it. And so I think being specific here with the, so you are trying to find a way to break up with this person and do it gently. So I think that just making it a little bit more specific would be my feedback there.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason.
Sure. Let's move along because we got a bunch here, and we want to give everybody a chance to practice a bunch of times. So here's what the book has. When you texted to break the date, you initially felt guilty that you were doing something wrong, but then you reasoned it was better not to do it face to face. I'm wondering what you feared might happen if you let yourself continue to feel guilty. Great. Okay. Let's move along. Okay, so patient says, matter-of-factly, I don't recall when you're taking your vacation. Can you remind me what you said last week? And these are getting harder as they go along.
While people are still working, Crystal, I got your question, so we'll answer it in a bit. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I was hoping we could do that. I can also tag it for the end if you want, Hannah.
Great. Thank you. You want to pick one, Jason?
Yeah, sure. Let's go with our very own Mackenzie. It can be hard to forget. It can be easy to forget when I'll be out of the office. I wonder what might have come up for you if you had remembered and thought about it between sessions.
Yeah, that's beautiful, right? So the validation of the defense, which is forgetting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what would have come up for you if you would have remembered and thought about it? So again, getting to the underlying possible fear.
Great.
Lovely.
And here's a short one. It's hard to remember my vacation schedule. I wonder if you have feelings about it that go beyond the logistical.
Yeah, yeah, excellent.
Yeah, there's something poetic about that one too. I like it.
Sweet. Yeah, thank you.
Huh. Okay. What about this one, Hannah? Thanks again for asking. I wonder what it's like to know I'll be available. I'll be unavailable. Thanks again for asking. I wonder what it's like to know I'll be unavailable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the thanks for asking. So there I'd want to more point out the defensive strategy to the, what are they doing, right? They're forgetting, you know. So I'd want to focus on that part, difficult to remember, et cetera, right? And then the second part, I think, would you just repeat that, Jason?
Yeah. I wonder what it's like to know I'll be unavailable.
Right, right. And that question stands alone that really hopefully would get at some underlying issues, but it doesn't quite put together what would happen if they didn't use the defensive strategy. So I'd want to maybe just tweak it a little bit so that it doesn't stand as a question by itself, but it's, you know, it connects with, here's a defense, and now what would happen if you didn't use that defense?
Yeah.
I want to tie it together a little bit more.
Yeah. And I think this is a good question, a good time for the question, which is, can we name the specific defense in criteria 1? Right? Can we use splitting, or can we use, I mean, you know, and I don't know if the question was specifically about clinical sort of definitions of defenses, but what about that? What about the specific defense? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I love Lee McCullough's definition of a defense. She said it can be anything.
Mm.
You know, they're as common as snowflakes. So in other words, we learn sometimes there are these 7 defenses, there are these, you know, 12 defenses, what have you. There are categories of defenses, but really anything can be used to protect the person from anxiety, from discomfort, right?
Yeah.
So to name the defense, I think if you stayed closer to the specific behavior, you would be naming the defense in a non-technical way and in a way that I would hope would relate to the patient better.
Mm-hmm. And that goes along with the validating. I mean, that you're on there, you're with them in terms of seeing it as something that was adaptive at a certain point. And in this one, the defense clearly is forgetting, right?
Right.
Okay. So let's look at the answer from the book. You usually have such a good memory, but here you forgot. I'm taking my vacation but here, okay. You usually have such a good memory, but here you forgot I'm taking my vacation at the end of the month. Do you think remembering I will be gone could have caused you to have a difficult week? So there's some leaps in that one in terms of really connecting some dots to what the kind of the client or patient material.
Right. Yeah. You know, do you think remembering, which would be, you know, the opposite of using the defense? In other words, what's the fear?
Mm-hmm. And this one gets at nicely, I think, what I was talking about at the beginning is that there's a way here that in this description that you're being listened to very carefully. You're being remembered, for having a good memory. It's being referenced that you had a hard week. And there's just something very crisp, as you said, about the kind of listening pointing out it, that the defense and inquiring about it really, really has. It's beautiful. Okay, let's move along. Next example, we got boastfully. When I applied to colleges, I considered applying to some top schools, but I decided I wouldn't apply to any of them because they rarely live up to their reputations. When I applied to colleges, I considered applying to some top schools, but I decided I wouldn't apply to any of them because they rarely live up to their reputations. Okay, they're coming in now.
These are wonderful.
Yeah. Let's go with Ellie here. I hear that you're putting a lot of effort into researching schools before applying. I wonder what would happen if you weren't as cautious.
Oh, interesting. I like it, right?
That's good.
Finding out
Yeah.
the defense and then wondering what would happen, underlying fear. Great.
Yeah. And you can see the quick thinking there, cautious as the strategy, which is really cool. You're taking a step back from applying to top schools. What are you afraid you would be missing out on?
Those certainly names the defense. You're taking a step back,
Mm.
and then wondering what would happen if you, what are you
What are you afraid you would be missing out on?
out on? Yeah. What are you afraid you'd be missing out on? I think that's certainly in the ballpark about the fear. And maybe I would be more explicit. What are you afraid you would be risking if you did apply to those other schools?
Mm-hmm.
I might be a little more specific in that second part.
Okay, great. I guess the choosing
Yeah,
not to apply. Oh, go ahead, Hannah, please.
Let me just sneak in a little statement here, that obviously in the reality of the clinical case, you're going to have a series of back and forth and back and forth. And so any kind of lack of specificity and so forth with what the patient says next is going to be corrected, and you're going to, go forward from there. But in doing these deliberate practice exercises, we are really holding the trainees to be as precise as possible, because we really want them to get into their bones, more in this procedural memory way, what's involved. And then, of course, they can do it in a more nuanced way when they're actually working with the patient. But here we're kind of going through the drill.
Yeah, and the other reason to be specific is that you can really tease out, which criteria, if the trainee or the person learning the skill is hitting both criteria. So it really, that's what's one of the really cool things about deliberate practice, is it really can show where people kind of where their focus needs to be. Maybe it's on criteria 1, or maybe it's on criteria 2, and we can really drill into that in practice. So let's go one more. Devaluing the schools you initially thought to apply for acceptance, you decided to let them go. I wonder what you think might have happened, if you applied. Devaluing the schools you initially thought to apply for acceptance, you decided to let them go. I wonder what you might think have happened if you applied.
Yeah, that hits the nail right on the head, right? First, pointing out the defense in a very understanding way, and then wondering, what might have happened. And then that gets at the patient fears. So excellent, excellent job.
Great. This was a hard one too. It sounds like you have it sounds like you have thought a lot about colleges you would like to apply to and why. Was there some fear on your part as to what might happen if you didn't apply to the top schools? If you did apply to the top schools, it sounds like you gave a lot of thought to the colleges you would apply to and why. Was there some fear on your part as to what might happen if you did apply to the top schools? Right?
You could see everyone was certainly in the ballpark.
Completely. Yeah. Okay. Our last and final before we open it up for some questions. My week has been all right, a little stressful, but what do you think of the current political stuff?
I've got one I want to go to.
Okay, jump in there, Hannah.
So you've had a stressful week, but you're quick to shift the conversation to a global picture. And that's certainly criterion number 1. I wonder what might happen if we stay for a moment with what your world was like this week, right? So the first part really labels the defense, and I wonder what might happen. And here you might just, again, to make it more specific to this criterion, I wonder, if there's some fear that you have about if we stayed with what your world was like this week, right? So I love that shift between the world picture and let's get back to your world. And is there some fear about getting into your world?
Yeah, I think that's nice because it kind of you see the big world and then you just see the patient's world kind of. I like that a lot too. How about this one? You have had a difficult week, stressful thinking about the political environment. You are wondering if my perspective can help you feel less stressed. You have had a difficult week, stressful thinking about the political environment. You are wondering if my perspective can help you feel less stressed.
Right. So it's really naming for the patient something that you feel might be going on with them, right? Say it again, Jason.
You have had a difficult week, stressful thinking about the political environment. You are wondering if my perspective can help you feel less stressed.
Yeah, I was trying to
Interesting.
hear how I might tweak it. You are wondering, so you're telling them, what's going on. Rather, I might just wonder about, and then have them see if they could get into what's underneath, right? What's underneath in terms of the fears involved. Just a slight tweak there to shift it.
Yeah, I like the tweak, and I think what it does is it connects it. I think it's, you're saying this is the place to focus on you, and not the bigger political picture. And I think that I like that tweak on it. Here's a provocative one that I want to throw at you as our last one here before we shift into questions. That's a pretty quick shift away from the stressful stuff, my friend. Do you think you're avoiding turning towards all that? That's a pretty quick shift away from the stressful stuff, my friend. Do you think you're avoiding turning towards all of that?
Yeah, two things. I think it so depends on the relationship you have with the client. There's a bit of a tease there. There's a bit of a jab. And yet, knowing the patient as you do, it could be just the thing to do. Just the thing, with a bit of humor, with a bit of irony. Could be just the thing to do to get that particular patient's attention and point out the defensive strategy in a more lighthearted way.
Yeah.
So again, you would need to know your patients of it, but I like the stylistic, part of it.
Right. And if we're assuming that there's the rapport there between client or between therapist and patient, then we can think that that might be validating to say, hey, we've got this rapport, this good rapport that we can talk like this, and let's focus in on you. And so, yeah, I could say I like that one.
I might just, before we go to the questions, maybe
Yeah.
again, second part of that. I wonder what might happen if we stay a moment with what your world was like this week. So that would maybe encourage the patient to go there. But here for the defense, this kind of defense analysis, if you will, again, I would just turn it a bit and ask the patient what the patient wonders might happen if we stay a moment with what you will. So in other words, it gets at their kind of internal working model, their fear, rather than kind of just going there. So
yeah, I like that. Thank you, Hannah.
I'm really enjoying.
Yeah, this is really, it's so lively today. It's just super fun. Okay, let's read the example here. Politics important, but the more we discuss them, the less we focus on you. I wonder if you're concerned that something worrisome would happen if we focused on you. Great. Yeah, and the examples have really have fallen so much in line with the responses we've gotten from people today. So really nice job, guys. And let's stop the share here. And we've got about 8 minutes for some questions. Okay. Yeah, well, this is a good question, Hannah, that I like, that we can start off. A lot of my clients are really affected by what's going on politically right now. This example is muddy to me. The reason for their experience that week may be because of their identities are impacted by politics. Great point. Would you have thoughts on that, Hannah?
Yes, any of these topics, of course, you could go so many different directions very effectively in the therapy. But here we're doing a drill. We're doing a practice, right? So like you're standing someplace on the basketball court and you're practicing free flows, free
throws.
from that position. But that doesn't at all negate that in a real game, you might not be better off standing here, or that you might have difficulty with a different shot. But here we're practicing something very specific. And that is initially getting into defenses by pointing them out and then looking for the function that they serve and then quite hopefully getting into the cost of having that defense to make them more ego dystonic. So it's just a beginning getting into defenses, and it's very focused. And that's what happens with the deliberate practice. It's very focused.
Yeah, wonderful. And yes, Kelly, they have been getting, thank you, first of all, for buying the book. It sounds like you got it. And yes, they have been getting harder as we've been going along today.
Right, and that's done purposefully. We have the kind of beginning statements, get people involved, see how they're doing, the middle, and then the more advanced. And this gives me an opportunity to say that one of the tenets that I absolutely love about doing deliberate practice is that you're finding the sweet spot for learning for each trainee, right? You're finding that zone of proximal development. You know, it's like Goldilocks. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. And so after a set of exercise, of examples, we might ask, well, we do ask the trainee, so how was that for you? How difficult was that for you? We can get more specific. On a scale from 1 to 10, how difficult was that for you? And we're really looking for something in that 7, 8, 6, 7, 8 range, which is it's hard. You're anxious, you know, you feel on edge. You're right at the cusp of knowing and not knowing what to do. That's excellent. We don't want it too easy. And we certainly don't want it so hard that you're overwhelmed.
Right.
That you're getting a migraine. We don't want that. And in a more traditional supervision, I found that trainees get very good talking about defenses at these self-protective acts because their anxiety is going through the roof, right? And rather than being in a zone of proximal development, they're in a zone of, you know, trying to protect their persona of knowing. So deliberate practice really is so welcoming of different levels of learning. And
yeah. And this is what I was getting at earlier with the criteria, is that you saw 2 criteria. Some of the exercises will have 3 or 4 criteria, right? That and so you can actually zoom in, you know, maybe I'm having trouble with validating today while I'm, you know, with this specific patient. And so, you know, we can just run the drill on practicing validating to get that set. And then, you know, make sure that's in the zone of proximal development, and then kind of move on to the next step of the next criteria. And you can really kind of make it so that it's specific to what the person whose training's needs are. Hannah, I got a question for you that you've used this term that is, I think it's one of the most useful psychodynamic terms for me in my work and thinking, ego syntonic and ego dystonic. Can you give a sense of what you mean when you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just, you know, something that feels a part of you, part of your identity, a part of the way you do your life, a way of your understanding, your relationship to others and relationship to self. It's just your reality, right? It's so egocentric, like the statement about the fish is the last organism to know anything about water, right? So versus dystonic, now it feels alien. Now it feels distant. Now it feels like something that is not you. I hope people won't be too disgusted, but one of the ways to talk about it is that, you know, when you have saliva in your mouth, it's part of you, but when you spit it out, you know, now it's very distant.
That's a great example. Thank you all. Thank you for the nice comments in the chat. I'm glad you got something out of today, and we look forward to seeing you next month as we do EFT with Rhonda Goldman on the 6th of June. Hannah, just wonderful being with you. Thank you so much. It's pleasure learning from you.
Oh, thank you, Jason. And thank you everyone for coming. Look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.
This webinar is made possible by the Sentio Marriage and Family Therapy Program. Visit us at www.sentio.org.